Hello, listeners. I hope everyone's doing well this week. As is very often the case, I'm going to kick this episode off with a personal anecdote. 2 years ago in April, I had a sport-specific injury doing judo training. A beginner did something that was very unexpected and not allowed. That's why it was unexpected. They stacked me, as we would say, onto my own neck, which is about as comfortable as it sounds. There was a crunching sound and my right arm went totally limp and I couldn't raise it. So I used my judo belt as a kind of makeshift sling and took myself off to hospital. I was put in a neck brace at the hospital and then went through a period of forced meditation because I was lying flat on my back, completely immobile, staring at the ceiling for 3 hours. I then had an MRI scan. After this, I went off home in my neck brace. A few weeks later, there was no word from the hospital, the pain had subsided, and I went back to training. Some judo, karate, some kickboxing, and so on. During this time, I developed what has now become a permanent tingling and numbness, a bit of pins and needles, down my small finger and ring finger in my hand. I can't turn my head to one side because it feels like there's something blocked inside. I've also had bouts of dizziness, and as I'm walking from time to time, we'll just suddenly start sort of drifting to one side and find it really hard to bring myself back to walking straight, as well as having had the worst possible toothaches you can ever imagine. Now, last week, I received a phone call from the hospital, 2 years after my MRI, to ask if I could go in to see the spinal specialist right now. And I thought, well, that's curious. Hospitals don't normally call you up and say, come over immediately. But I suspect as well that since this has taken 2 years, that somewhere along the line, they had lost my MRI and maybe just found it. So anyway, off I went to the hospital. I met with the consultant and he showed me my MRI, showed me that 4 of my cervical vertebrae, so that's the ones in my neck, were a different color from the others. And that showed that there was basically damage to the vertebrae themselves. And of those 4 vertebrae, 2 of them had herniated discs, which it appeared when you were looking at the MRI and he zoomed it in that they were so badly herniated that they're actually touching my spinal cord. He said, this is the cause of my tingling, my inability to move my neck, my episodes of dizziness. Basically, it's some nerve problems in there. And he booked me in for another MRI and some physiotherapy and said that depending on the next MRI, I might need some surgery to my neck. So very exciting times. But although it's what we call in the philosophy of science, inference to best explanation, that this was caused by a sports injury, it's also possible that the discs in my neck were herniated. So what's the deal with this? Like, why would I have herniated discs in my neck irrespective of a sport? And why is it that as we get older, so many people begin to report chronic neck and back pain? Both of these originate in the spine. So what's the deal? Why would a spine be the cause of more chronic pain for people than any other body part? It's certainly, I know, led to a whole industry, pseudoscientific and otherwise, dealing with back pain. You can go out and buy special chairs for your home or your office or even your car, pillows to sit on, special shoes that are supposed to relieve pressure on your back, braces that you wear around your torso, devices that you lie on to reset your spine, tables that you plug your feet in on and flip yourself upside down to decompress your spine, different training protocols from personal trainers, physical therapists that will insist your back problems come from the fact your glutes aren't firing or your core isn't turning on. But could there be an anatomical cause? One that actually lies in our own evolutionary biological history? Well, some scientists seem to think so. And they think that we suffer from back pain because we are walking around in bodies that were not actually designed for upright living. Our spines actually evolved for life as a quadruped, which is walking on all fours, not for this bipedal, upright life that we now lead. Now, to really understand why our backs are giving us such a hard time, we've got to go back 7 million years. At this point in time, our earliest ancestors, which are currently considered to be Sahelanthropus, but that may change, if they discover more fossil records, as they do all the time. While Sahelanthropus was considered to be the first quadrupedic ancestor of ours that moved to bipedal living. There are many possible reasons for why this could have happened, such as it gives you an enhanced ability to spot predators. It's around about this time that humans began to move out of forests and into grassland. That grassland, you required to see over the grass to see if predators were coming. That's also around about the same time that humans developed language for communicating about things like the potential approach of predators. It also just makes it much easier if you're standing upright to be able to reach berries and fruits and so on that are perhaps out of reach if you're on all fours. So, although this ancestor considered to be the closest that humans can get to the common ape ancestor that we have, it was shifting to a bipedal life, it still was a quadruped. Their spines were evolved only for that. Bipedalism was perhaps better for traits which are advantageous to survival, but not best for purpose because the spines were adapted to distribute load in a quadrupedic position. In one position, right, we've got your spine, if you're walking around on all fours, your spine's almost horizontal, a bit like a suspension bridge would be across a canyon. And now we've kind of flipped it vertically. So instead of being loaded horizontally, it's now loaded top down, a bit like a skyscraper might be. Now, a skyscraper and a suspension bridge are both capable of supporting huge amounts of loads because we know that we have very, very long suspension bridges and we know we also have very, very tall skyscrapers. However, they're designed for different purposes. If you tried to flip a suspension bridge vertically and then load it top down, it would be no surprise if it suffered a structural failure. Likewise, if you flipped a skyscraper on its side and then loaded it horizontally, it might be no surprise if it broke in the middle. So when our ancestors shifted to walking upright, their spines underwent several major changes as they had to adapt to this. And not all of these were actually beneficial. The first one is really what we call an S-curve. And if you look at a human spine from the side, it's shaped like an S. And this curve helps us to balance our weight over the middle of our feet. And that's crucial for remaining balanced and staying upright. If your weight shifts over your toes, you fall forwards. If your weight shifts over your heels, you fall backwards. But this S shape's also inherently unstable and prone to problems. So in quadruped, the spine's more like a gentle arch, and it distributes weight a lot more evenly. But yes, when you tip that structure upright, gravity pulls on different parts of the spine that then cause wear and tear over time. And this could be an explanation for the presence of herniated discs, things like sciatica, and all sorts of different lower back issues. The next problem is the lumbar region, which is also the biggest problem area for most people. The lumbar spine, or the lower part of the back, takes most of the load when we're walking, we're running, or even just standing. And because of the curvature of the lumbar spine, it's constantly under pressure. That pressure can lead to degeneration of the discs between the vertebrae. And this is why lower back pain is by far the most common type of back pain, because the lumbar spine wasn't designed to handle vertical load over a lifetime, especially when we consider modern human lifespans versus our prehistoric ancestors. So it's no surprise there's wear and tear. Next adaptation would be the shape of the pelvis. Our pelvis shape had to widen and then tilt forwards to support our upright posture. But this tilting forward of the pelvis also tightens and shortens the musculature in our backs, and it also tightens the hamstrings. That makes us more prone to things like straining those muscles, stiffness in those muscles. If you've got tightness in your low back after a long day of sitting, then you really blame your pelvis. It's trying to stabilize a structure that wasn't designed for that purpose in any way. So, evolution's probably left us with a spine not fit for the purpose of bipedal life or modern life, which has really just turned the whole thing into a bit of a disaster because we no longer spend our days hunting, gathering, by walking around, getting in various positions. We spend our days sitting at desks, hunched over laptops, slouching on sofas. None of this is good for the body. In fact, sitting down is arguably one of the worst things you could possibly do for your spine. When we sit for long periods of time, that natural curve in the lumbar spine flattens out and puts even more pressure on your discs. This compresses the spine down and it strains the surrounding muscles, leading to chronic pain, maybe. Then there's what we have known colloquially as tech neck, which is obviously a modern condition of technology where we're looking down a lot at our phones or computers. I'm doing it right now. Now, the human head weighs about 10 to 12 pounds, but when you tilt it forwards and down to look at a device, you're moving the load away from the center of mass, which makes it feel heavier, right? Because it's further away from where your balance point is. So you're taking something that weighs sort of 10 pounds and turning it into something that weighs about 60 pounds. This brings a lot of strain to our neck. So we're stuck with this kind of problematic spine because of our common ancestors, but doesn't mean really that you're doomed to suffer forever or that suffering will inevitably come, because there are things that we could do to mitigate the effects of our evolutionarily design. So we could move more, sit less, because the more we move, the happier our spines are and our joints in general. Frequent movement helps to lubricate your discs, strengthen your core muscles, improve your flexibility. If you have a desk job, recommend standing, stretching, walking around every sort of 30 to 60 minutes. You might even look into a standing desk. I know people that had a lot of problems with pain that was alleviated by switching to a standing desk. A strong core itself is essential for stabilizing your spine, something for sure that physical therapists have got right. So things like planks and bridges and other core strengthening exercises can help to take some load off your spine. So to conclude this week, our backbones are really a relic of a quadruped-based past. They've been retrofitted for life as a biped. And whilst it's definitely a flawed design, we can do things to keep our spine more healthy. More movement, some core strengthening, and maybe even just being more aware of our position in space. So think about not slouching over your device. And these things might be a more attractive proposition than trying to fix the problem going back to living as a knuckle-dragging quadruped. Hope everyone has a good week. If you want to send me an email, getfitguy@quickanddirtytips.com. Get Fit Guy is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. Thank you to that team, Morgan Christensen, Holly Hutchins, Brandon Getchis, Davina Tomlin. If you've got a question, you can also voicemail me. That's, if you're still living in 1980, 510-353-3104, or send me an email at getfitguy@quickanddirtytips.com. Visit quickanddirtytips.com. Check out the show notes in the podcast app.